Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Story Making Show with your hosts, Jim Woods and Caitlin TK Johnson. I'm really here to ask Jim a bunch of questions. You're the author of two nonfictions, Focus Booster and Ready Aim Fire, and a new fiction, Bite the Bullet. Now, I got super interviewy there just for the introduction, but we're really here to have a conversation, have some fun, and talk about how to create a good story, which I think people forget about this all the time. So I'm so glad the other day when I saw your message saying, "I'm going to tweak this a little bit. Let's talk about how to create a good story on Friday." I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad people don't talk about that enough. They just think write your story, but what is a good story?"
That's like the ultimate question. I think
Mhm.
that's what gets us both going, right?
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah.
and it's easy to say, well, this example is a good story, but a lot of it's preference. There's a lot of personality
Mhm.
differences that can come into play there too. And I've been fascinated with the movie Jaws. Like I've watched it like 3 times over the last week, and I've just been so fascinated with it. And I haven't read the book. I just bought it. I know the book's different than the movie. And I've been kind of like, I love to pick apart the stories I love. And I think that's one of my ultimate takeaways for everyone creating, what they feel are good stories, because we're not writing for everybody.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was even listening to a audiobook the other day, and it's like the author was encouraging writers to go like one step too far,
Oh.
like one step past your comfort level, like,
Mm.
and that's scary. Like, you know, if you were writing a horror movie, it's like, okay, this is scary. Oh, I'm going to take it even further. And that, you know what I'm saying? Like that would be really uncomfortable. But
Mm.
I think it's probably actually not a bad rule of thumb, especially when you're like creating and then you work with a good editor, and then you kind of, then you can kind of get on track there. But it's just so interesting when creating good stories. I'm more of a research analytical,
Mm.
as far as how I look at stories. I mean, obviously there has to be an emotional compelling part to it, but that varies. Emotions vary. One day you're
Mhm.
happy, one day you're sad, or one day you know emotions can change so much. So I'll take something that I really love and I'll just start like really analyzing it. So I have a stack of books next to me here, and I will share a few of them with you, and like I can tell you what I steal from these books and how I
Mm.
learn from them. I have books everywhere. It's kind of hilarious. And I know that's one thing that when I was first getting to know you, TK, I was like, oh my gosh, I have books everywhere. They're everywhere. And I'll even buy multiple copies of the same books,
Mm.
movies, so I can just mark them up and like, have the one pristine copy and mark them up. Well, I have a bunch of books here, and I'm like going through them, and I'm like, oh, why do I like this story? Why do I like that story? And I know I've done this before, even on this show, but it's so different having someone to interact with versus, you know, talking to yourself. I absolutely love this book. It did influence my novel a lot. It's called Payback. Also, the movie, Mel Gibson, I love it, by Richard Stark. This is like the quintessential crime novel. And I have literally like typed out this entire book, and I've marked up this book. And I mean, literally, it has duct tape as a binding. That's pretty dedicated. I do have a nice, clean, big copy, but I like this one. It's sentimental, right?
I feel like you're breaking an essential rule, especially to huge readers.
Yeah,
There's the big debate of do you earmark a page? You're talking about writing in a book, highlighting. You've got a duct taped
I
like
do.
cover.
I
Oh
do.
my word. I think some people might be squirming a little, wondering if they should watch the rest of this.
What else does he do to his books?
But I love your method because you buy two. Because if you have two copies, one could be pristine, stay on the trophy shelf, and the other can be like your workbook through that book.
Yeah, and I think that's a great. I've never called it the workbook, but yes,
Mm,
that is exactly it. And I have like multiple copies. That's the ultimate compliment, or like from me, because I'll have several copies, and I will pencil in what are they doing,
mm.
what's happening here, what the transitions. Oh my goodness, that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Transitions between chapters,
Mhm.
transitions between action. And
Yeah.
I will mark up a book like no one's business, and I have zero remorse about it. Um, I also have this massive book that a friend bought me, where it's like the extreme version of this, The Godfather.
Wow.
This is the Godfather Notebook on the back away
Wow.
here. And this
Meant
book is
to be
huge. I
written.
mean, like literally, it takes over. But Francis Ford Coppola did the same kind of thing. So there must be a method to my madness in sorts, where he copied. I'm moving the wrong way for the camera. He took the pages from The Godfather and slapped them in like one page at a time
Mm.
in a big notebook, and then gave it wider margins. And that's how he directed The Godfather. Like, he didn't go, hey, let's write a screenplay. It
Mhm.
was more, hey, let's mark up the novel.
Mm.
And when I saw that, when a friend sent me that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing, concept ever, because it's like taking my own approach and cranking it to 10.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and when you talk about what makes a good story, what makes a good novel, I mean, these days it's so easy to write and put up your work somewhere. So a lot of it is up to opinion. Some people love tropes. What makes a good novel has a lot of tropes. Other people are like it's a surprise ending or a twist that you never saw coming. But I would say overall, there are probably a couple key factors that definitely make it a good or bad story when it
Mm,
comes to the quality, I guess.
okay.
And it's hard to really rank them off the top of your head, but I guess if you had like three of the first things you could think of that create a good novel, that maybe take a young writer to more of an expert writer level, what do you think the top three things that come to your mind? What are those?
Number one, conflict.
I love that you already knew. You're like, oh, I got it. Number
No,
one.
I was shaking my head, nodding a lot, because
Mm,
that the first page can lose me. The
mm,
first page, I'll be honest, like, I think the first page, you can't bank on only the first sentence. That's too
mm,
extreme. But I I can easily be swayed that
mm.
quickly, because I can get a sense for the voice that fast. And if I'm on board for the ride, so to speak, it's pretty much right there.
Yeah.
And like, the sooner you have conflict, the sooner you have a clear, distinct voice.
Mm,
And this, you're going to pick on me a bit about what I'll share with you later, but like, your voice has to be your voice. It can't be a bunch of other familiar voices. Like,
mm,
you can't go and just, hey, I'm going to copy a Stephen King book, I'm going to type it up, and I'm going to sound like Stephen King.
mm.
I mean, yeah, you can go be a bad knockoff of Stephen King, but like, it needs to be your own thing. And I think your own personal experiences, what you like, what you dislike, that's where your voice really starts to shine.
Mhm.
And I have like a stack of screenplays here. Like, Quentin Tarantino is a huge influence for me. For a long time, I didn't even know it.
Mm.
I was joking with you before the live stream. I got this movie in the mail, True Romance. I got the Blu-ray copy, which this movie is like from '93. I didn't even know Tarantino wrote that, but that was a hugely influential movie for me. Like, that's probably my number one. The only other number two that I'd argue would be like The Godfather, Jaws. Maybe all three could spar it out a little bit.
Mhm.
Payback would be another. But
Mm.
I I didn't know that Tarantino wrote it until like years later, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, well, I don't want to sound just like Tarantino. Yes, he's an influence, but I mean, you can't just sound like one other writer. You're going to
Mhm.
be a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy, and
Yeah.
it's hard to tell a good story if everybody already knows what's coming.
Mhm.
And it's, I mean, we like some familiarity, we like some tropes, but you know, why go for the imitation when you can go for the original, right?
Yeah.
And as you climb that creative family tree and figure out who influenced these other people, then you start to have a
Mhm.
real variety, an assortment of
Mhm.
influences versus, hey, this person just sounds like X, or
Mhm.
this writer, they write like, Y.
Yeah.
And it's more of a blender versus a, you know, rubber stamp copy kind of thing.
Yeah. And I love that example, the creative family tree. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about traditional publishing when you submit query letters for a literary agent in order to go find a publisher who wants to traditionally publish your book. They ask you a whole list of questions. You have all this stuff to fill out in order to win them over, get them to read your manuscript. But one of them is, give us a list of authors, give us a list of other novels that you're similar to. And we were talking yesterday about, well, that's so hard because you can say, I write like C.S. Lewis or I write like Tolkien, but what part of that author do you write like? Is
Yeah.
it the genre?
Topics.
Is it the voice?
Yeah.
Is it the description, the dialogue that's similar? So I love that idea of the creative family tree because you can give almost a history, that family tree of here are the different people who have all stemmed from the same genre or the same style,
Yeah.
and I'm part of that. So I love that it's like more references, more authors and family really of that genre and that type that you can say I'm part of this family.
And it's funny. It makes me think of like, our real family. It's like
Mhm.
sometimes you're like, oh, well, yeah, I am. I'm part of this family. And sometimes we feel like we don't fit in, right? Heaven
Mhm.
forbid we feel like we don't fit in.
Mhm.
Artists thinking they don't fit in. Um,
What?
right? Heaven forbid. This is crazy talk. I've broken mine down a bit. I've
Mm.
went pretty far, and I know the key moments, the key stories. Like I really dug deep into this because
Mm.
if you even ask me like one of the books, I'd be like, oh, I found this author because of this author.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
love authors that share lots of the books that they love. They're just, and Stephen King, even he does this. He mentions it. He's like, hey, this author, and it is a family when you start sharing different stories with other people.
Mm.
And I feel like you can really narrow it down quickly.
Mm.
And I know I'm more of a journalist, investigator. I'm piecing it together like a puzzle.
Oh yeah. I get
Versus,
that from your writing.
you
Yep.
know that. I mean, it's like, well, he took some of this and this and this and this, and then eventually you bring it together.
Mhm.
It's not like just one, hey, I just thought of this, boom, here it is. I don't I'm in awe of people that kind of can do that. But then again, I wonder, maybe it's like they've been collecting ideas all
Mm.
along too.
Mm.
How they process it's a little different. I know you mentioned you're kind of you have a dream, and hey, I'm going to bring that to.
I daydream. Yeah. We were just talking about this before we went live. I am a daydreamer. I can just sit and stare into space and be creating this world and creating these characters and start mapping out and outlining my story. And for the 3 books I've written so far, I've never put that onto paper. I've never outlined, I've never like written character descriptions. It's all been in my head, and then I just start letting the story unfold as I write. And I think you taught me that is called writing in the dark.
Yes, it
And
is.
I love that. I've always had this life mantra that we are the dark that makes the stars shine. Because I grew up working backstage while the other people were in the spotlight. They were the star of the show. But
Yeah.
you can't see a star in the middle of the daylight. We are the dark that makes them shine. They need you in order to shine their brightest. And for whatever reason, that just ties in for me of an author that writes in the dark. I like
That's
that.
awesome.
But you are an outliner, and that's what we were talking about. You're like, people who don't use an outline, how do they even get their story on page?
I've tried. And you know what, too? I will say this. I know I'm a work in progress. The more you get, it's like, I know I'm a work in progress. And I think there are certain books that really help you. I'm going to promote a friend of mine, his book, Story Maps. This book really helped bring it together for me, where it's for screenwriters, but seeing the big picture really helps. And if you're in the genre, you can narrow it down too. I think if you're in the, hey, I just want to write a novel phase, you gotta, I mean, I'm not saying don't daydream. Of course, you got to keep exploring.
That's part of writing is daydreaming.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I love to ask what if. I love to explore. I love to, it looks a little different. And I think that like Story Maps was like, okay, I can figure out a whole story and break it down a little more analytical, but not like engineering where you're like really, really deep and it, laying it all out on an Excel spreadsheet. I freeze up. I'm like, look, Excel is for numbers. Don't you dare make me do a story on
a spreadsheet.
That's not fun.
Well, I want to go back just a little bit. Right away, you said conflict is the number one thing for a good story. And I want to compare that to one of the examples that you've been talking about, Jaws. When you think conflict, usually you think villain. There's a bad guy and a good guy.
Yep.
These days, especially, I feel like you're always told, and in the fiction genre, because that's where I write, and talk to me a little bit about that. But you're asked to write a villain who is very clearly a villain. They need a personality. You need to have a well-rounded villain just as much as you need a well-rounded hero. But if you look at the example of Jaws, it's a shark. There's no personality. There's no backstory. There's no huge motive. It's a shark. He's going to eat you.
Yeah.
But and yet it's such a classic. The classic villain is the shark in Jaws.
Right. Well, I think there are a little, I don't disagree, but I do think there are more elements in play. One, fear. Holy cow. That's like, that movie has traumatized how many people, right? And I keep wanting to have my kids watch it, possibly because I don't like swimming, but maybe this is all connected. I don't know. Right. I just admitted too much there. I think the mayor is the villain from greed. However, he would say, no, I'm just helping the people's livelihoods, that I'm just helping people. And I think that's one part of the whole villain conversation. The villain doesn't necessarily view themselves as the villain. I think everyone views themselves as a hero in the context of their own story. Even the shark, it's more, hey, see food, eat food kind of thing, a bit more in that. And, Quint is kind of the villain. He has a lot of the same elements as Ahab from Moby Dick. I mean, I think we can really paint things as simple. And if you want to view them through that lens, that's fine. I'm not judging. I'm just saying, I think you can also dig deeper and look at it a little bit differently and say, oh, well, you know what? Maybe they just should have shut down the beaches for a while and the shark moves on and, but conflict is so key.
Yeah.
And like the very first scene of Jaws, okay, we have this party, the girl goes swimming, boom, conflict from the get-go. And I love that. Hit them hard. Don't let the audience go. And I feel like that's where, if Star Wars didn't open up with a little space battle at the beginning and like have Darth Vader intro, like the story doesn't really go into full swing for like 45 minutes. But the space battle and Darth Vader's intro is like, that's the conflict. Man, that's probably the most few most important minutes and moments in cinematic history. If it would have been a little bit more boring and had a little bit more droids in the desert kind of thing wandering around, who knows? That story might have tanked completely.
Yeah.
And I'm not just, George Lucas really thought that, like, and even Spielberg, when making Jaws, like he's like, this isn't going to work. So there's always an element of, hey, this might not work. But I think conflict is so key, and you have to care about the characters. That character development is huge. If you don't
Mhm.
care about the characters, then you get the lots of explosions, but yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
It's the
some are
entertainment movie, but not the one that people actually enjoy and love. Yeah.
and you don't have much story to pull
Mhm.
from it. It's like, hey, yeah, it was okay.
Mhm.
Mm. And I think there's always that caution of having it be a spectacle versus being a story.
Mm. And I think too, I mean, just talking about how Jaws wasn't really the villain, the shark was not really the villain. You know, you talk about or you think about protagonists and antagonists, it's not always the hero and the bad guy. Sometimes like Vader, he
Mhm.
was the one through that series who really changed. He was the one that went
Yep.
through the change in the series. Luke Skywalker didn't change that much. He knew what he wanted. He got what he wanted, in a way. Like there wasn't as much change with him. Is he really, who are your real protagonists and antagonists there? And being able to cultivate them, I think really, like you were saying, that's what creates the conflict in the story. Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. It's like we all have our favorites. We all have different personalities.
Oh yes.
Like I always liked Han Solo more than Luke. I was like,
Mm.
Luke's he's kind of whiny.
Yeah.
I know that's common. A lot of people said that. It's like, oh yeah, Han Solo, he's awesome. This is great.
Mm.
He's like a gunslinger, like
Mm.
it was a Western kind of character, a bounty hunter kind of
Mhm.
smuggler. And, I think we all are pulled in a certain direction. And I think that element of danger
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
be there. I mean, yes, there's conflict, but what are the stakes?
Mm.
And if the stakes aren't like really high, life or death, just my honest opinion, that's why I don't like the Marvel movies very much.
Mm.
I don't enjoy them that much because I don't feel there are really any stakes.
It's always just the world's in danger.
Yeah,
Save
and
the world.
it's what too. I will say it's like if it's the same kind of story over and over,
Mm.
you're gonna get a little numb to it. I loved the Daredevil series, which
Mm.
Daredevil
The
got hurt.
Now
He
we're
would
gonna have
like
to be clear about this. Like the comic books, the Netflix revision, the Ben Affleck Daredevil, or do you just mean in general?
well, I like the Netflix series,
Okay.
the
All right.
TV one, because he would get hurt, and
Mhm.
it was like really,
Seriously.
yeah,
Seriously hurt. Yeah.
and they'd show it. It was
Mm.
like more Batman, like
Mm.
how I wish they would do Batman a little bit more, where it's like this is just a real guy who has been in training, and it's
Mhm.
not like this, alien from another planet fighting a big laser beam kind
Mm.
of thing. And I've migrated a bit over that. I mean, I think most people are like, hey, I used to love Superman, but then I now love Batman or whatever. And I think our tastes do change a little bit over time within reason.
Yeah. We're looking for almost the more realistic story, the more relatable characters in that way. Yeah. Okay, so I want to twist this a bit
Yes.
because I want to talk a little bit about your book because I've
Okay.
had the pleasure of reading it and talking to you about it, and
Mhm.
it's going to be available soon.
Tuesday,
Yeah,
July
Tuesday. Woo.
13th.
Yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
So, talk to me about how you developed your own characters to make a great story. Your wounds, stakes, serious conflict, your empathetic,
I love it.
the times that come in.
You
I have,
know,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
that's awesome. I appreciate the question. I think it goes back 10 years.
Mm,
I wrote a little story on a whim. It was a writing challenge, like a writing prompt. I used to write a lot for this website called The Write Practice, and it was just practice.
Hmm.
Writing was like that was the homework. And I loved it because it was like little assignments and you just start writing. Well, the prompt was like write a redemption story. And I'm like, okay, whatever. All right. And I wrote this gritty little crime novel like idea, this little crime story idea. And I didn't think much about it. It just kind of flew out of me. And then I was like, hey, I really enjoyed that. Let's write a whole novel. Yeah, okay. And I just kept expanding it. And then once I was done with it, I was like, I don't think this character, I kind of made a mistake somewhere. And I was treading the line between writing a cop and writing a vigilante. I was like, I just didn't make that choice. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to come back to that. It's like right there. And I love that character, but I said, oh, I'm going to write a cop. I am absolutely going to write a cop story. And that's where this book really came from. I said, okay, I'm not going to make this treading the line. He's a vigilante from the special forces or something. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write a more straight cop story. And it was funny because I just had this, I was like, well, all right, I have to put myself like, okay, what kind of story would interest me? What would happen? What would pull me in? And I think what I really did was I kind of took a lot of The Godfather and a lot of Payback and a lot of like a bunch of other influences. And I said, okay, let's bring these together and make this character super flawed, yet still enough like you could still like him. You're not like cheering against him. And that was kind of the genesis for the book Bite the Bullet.
It's so awesome to hear that background, because as you're talking, I see it. Because there are things about Malone, I'm like, ooh, like he's going a little vigilante there. And it wasn't full on. It was, I'm a cop, but you know what? We don't have the resources to get things done. And so he started taking things into his own hands just here and there. Not full on vigilante, but that just knowing your background, that makes more sense why he does those things, that you were on that line and you chose, the cop side versus the full on vigilante side. And so that's very cool to hear. So that's your main character. And I personally feel like when writing characters, I fall into this slippery slope where my side characters, my BCD characters are almost more interesting than my main character, where I feel like they have more growth and development than my main character does sometimes. But how do you find that balance so that your main character is still growing? How do you write your supporting cast? How do you come up with your supporting characters? Yeah.
I think they're not supporting characters. Unless it's like, hey, they're only in like one scene. Then it's more, well, how can they serve the scene? But I still think, okay, they're going to do other things. And I like this book, Bite the Bullet. I'm creating a whole world. Characters will come in and out. It's not like this is it. This is like one piece of the puzzle. And I think I've learned that over the years too. Just like, I love The Wire. I think that's one of my all-time favorite shows, where it's like a lot of it was focused on one character, and then they shifted and they said, hey, we're going to mess with you. This is the protagonist this season, not so much the next season. And I like that, because then you're not like completely dependent. You're not betting the house or betting the farm on that one character. And also just, I'll be honest, I think women are so poorly portrayed in so many stories. Even in my novel, I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to this female character than just being a wife or a mom. Like, she has her own, wants and desires and dreams. And it's so easy to fall into that, where you're like, oh, I'm writing a crime novel. Women are only here for this one little thing, and move them out of the way. Yeah. I'm kind of thinking like, okay, this is really interesting if we start saying, ooh, the wife here, or this one person here, they can have their own story too. They can do other things. They can, I think almost every character, they're going to have like some wound. They're going to have some edge to them. Even the most docile mother character, you push the right buttons, she's gonna blow up on you, and
she's still got Mama Bear.
That's exactly
Mama Bear.
Yeah, it's like that story could be, frankly, more interesting than the typical story that you would see. And I was even thinking, like, even a hotel clerk, you probably wouldn't give it much thought, but just talking to you now, it's like I remember a conversation I had once with a guy that worked in the jewelry store, and he was just saying all these stories of things that he's seen working in the jewelry store.
Hmm.
And I was like, I was soaking it up. I was like, I need to go, like, can I come back with a recorder? Because
Hmm.
he's like, look, he's like, well, this guy is only buys jewelry for his ex-girlfriend, and it was like, or this guy buys jewelry here for his mistress, and this wife came in and they're cashing this in, and then this other guy came in, he tried to rob the place. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh my gosh, the stories of the jewelry clerk could be amazing. And again, that's, if they own the store, it's a different story. If they just work at the store, that's a completely different story.
Mm-hmm.
It's we can always shift that spotlight and kind of shine it where we want, which is really cool as creators and as storytellers.
Yeah. Well, and talking about the creative family tree, I mean, you've learned to look at situations this way, and you've learned to notice this and think, "Ooh, that could be a story. Ooh, that person could be very important. That could be a whole novel just about that one person." But I don't think a lot of us naturally think that. I think we're taught it over time. But I feel like a lot of authors don't have a lot of mentors, a lot of people raising them up all the time. And so we do look at the people who are already established, those famous movie makers, script writers, novelists. But are there things, because I know you and I are both big advocates for this. How do we help other writers? How do we help new writers? What are things you wish that you knew writing, whether it was about
Yeah,
character development or creating that world, or how to look at the world around you in order to find those stories and think that way?
right. One thing I've noticed just over the years, listening to other authors speak.
Mm.
And I always love the authors that are so honest. They'll just tell it like it is. I always
Mm.
love those folks. I'm like, oh. And often they'll just tell you, oh, I read this book and I read this book. And I'm not saying it's as simple as, hey, here's peanut butter, here's jelly,
Mhm.
just put the two together. But you can absolutely see the influence when someone tells you that explicitly.
Mm.
So when someone reads Bite the Bullet, they're going to be like, yeah, I get what you're doing here, Jim. I know what you're doing there. Yeah, a little bit. But they're not going to have a freaking clue
Mm.
until you shine that spotlight a little bit and say,
Mm.
oh yeah, well, I read this book and I read this book and this. It's like finding those influences is so key. And when people are open and honest about it, I just respect it more. I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And like even Tarantino, I mean, some people call him a ripoff artist. Some people are like, oh, he never does anything original. It's just remakes and all this. And I'm like, he's pretty influential. He's been around the block, and
Yeah. Yeah.
some would argue he's like one of the most influential directors and writers. And I'm like, I view it all as like, there's so many, we're not reinventing the wheel here.
Mm.
We're just kind of bringing it all together, and we're maybe showing another part of the wheel. Like we're turning it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to play Wheel of Fortune for some reason, but I think we're sharing like a new perspective
Mm.
and new angles on things. And I love it when people pull back that curtain a little bit, kind of like, I wish I knew this. I wish I would have known that. And that's how we learn. I mean, yeah, we have to learn the hard way too. I'm sure that's the best experience. But when people share like, oh, I wish I would have known this, that's usually what saves a lot of time.
Oh yeah. Have you? I'm going to ask a tough question.
Please do.
I don't like shying away from the awkward stuff. So, would you say that there are people that are inherently meant to write, that are good writers, and people that just don't have it? You hear that a lot back in the day of, I'm sorry, kid, you just don't have it, Do you think there are people that try to write that just don't have it? Or do you think that it's just a learning curve and practice that they need?
I think it's always practice.
Mm.
Always, always, always. Because story is the language we all speak.
Mm.
And some people, I mean, it might come a little more naturally. Like some people might just pick it up a little quicker, but it's not so much, that's only like the starting point. That's like
Yeah.
how you start the race. That's not finishing the race. That's just getting out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some people process things, out loud. Some people, like my brain kind of shuts down when I try typing on a computer. I get distracted. And that's one thing I'll admit. I'm like, I have no problem with admitting that I don't type well on a computer. I get distracted. So I have my little Alpha Smart Neo that I use, which I don't find myself on Twitter if I use this. I mean, I literally wrote Bite the Bullet on these. And I have several because I know I'll lose them or break them. And that's just how it goes. But some people like to write longhand. And there's so many ways to do it. It's like, if we start saying you have it or you don't have it, well, I feel like you could say that with anything, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, you might just try it another way and see how that works, versus as something as like, oh, you're a writer, you're not that's silly talk in my mind. I don't really understand that, because in some ways, I mean, everyone struggles with some imposter syndrome. Even as wild as it sounds, Stephen King was like, is this any good? I don't know. Am I a writer? And like his wife found the manuscript for Carrie in the trash. Like, he would not have been writing professionally, very likely. Like, he was teaching English classes. And it's like, I think everyone struggles with the imposter syndrome. So I don't buy into the you have it or you don't.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that I've read some work by people in their 20s and 30s that the story, the plot, the whole concept of the story was good, but the way they wrote out the plot, the way they developed their characters, the way they did their action scenes, I would compare it to the way a fifth grader might, or some of the work I did when I was in middle school, high school. But
Sure.
You give them, you keep reading books, you keep, like you said, listening to other authors, reading the articles about how to write your chapters better, how to start them, how to end them, how to get from point A to point B, what your character needs. I feel like it is very, again, that learning curve is there on how quickly and how much you can digest and how fast it digests. But I feel like you can become that expert novelist. You can become that person who feels the rhythm of, the chapter and of the novel as a whole. You get a sense for those things the more you do it and the more you're in it.
That's exactly it. It's a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it might not work. And there's so many different parts of stories where it's like, I don't know, I took the wrong turn. I blew up this U-Haul van and I shouldn't have, or I shot this person and I shouldn't have. That's usually my problems as a crime writer.
Like, I killed too many people in this scene.
Yes, that might be the Tarantino influence. I like some action and conflict, in that regard. And that is kind of my anti, nothing happens stance. So I'm kind of opposite on that, but it doesn't mean you took a wrong turn. I feel like you can always use that somewhere else. You could always make it a short story. There's so many. And worst case scenario, say like you think it's unsalvageable, you just completely made a mistake. That's still a bad attitude, because I guarantee you there's something in there. Maybe a little gem. Maybe it's a line of dialogue. Maybe it's just the freaking scene, like where it happened. Maybe it's the location. It wasn't all for naught,
Yeah.
That's more just kind of negative thinking. And we're mining, we're there at the creek. We're looking for those parts of the story. That's our job.
Yeah.
I feel that's why I know I am a little bit of a discovery writer. I do want to pants it. I do want to be like you in that, hey, let's just wing it and go with it. But
it's got its pros and cons.
I feel like going extreme though, in that, it's like, hey, give me a little bit of a framework and then let me go play.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my approach.
Yeah. I know I have the habit where if I write a scene that really just doesn't feel like it fits, or I'm like, it's just not going to work here, I don't trash it. I copy paste it from my document, and I have another document called scraps. And it's just scenes and paragraphs of stuff that I wrote that I'm like, that's not going to work. And so I paste it into my scraps, and I have gone back and used it for other stories. I'm like, remember that scene there?
Yeah.
It put me in a writer's block for a month. And then I realized, oh, it's because I have that scene, just take it out and I could flow again. Well, if it was a perfect fit later on with different characters, or like you said, a different location that worked better and made sense. And, some of that stuff can definitely still be reused. Um, I'm deviating a little bit. I use Pages when I write. Max
The
Office
app,
System Pages.
Yeah.
But for me, that's a great tool. I want to talk about tools because you held up your keyboard. You're like, this is what I use to keep me from getting distracted. What are other tools that you've used, maybe specifically for Bite the Bullet as you were writing it? Because that was your first fiction. You really switched gears for that one.
Right. First one I'm releasing. That's
yeah. You've written more.
I would then print out the paper, the physical paper, and go over it, have a binder with the pages that I printed, and also note cards are so helpful. This is also that structure, if you will, having the note cards where it's like this scene, this scene, this scene, is there, cause and effect? Because it's easy to kind of get lost in the woods and you're like, where am I? I don't know. Because you're staring at like one tree. But then you can back away with note cards, like those physical 3x5 cards. And I would paste all of those on one of those science fair boards, And also like just having that freedom when you have that page in your hands. Like I always ideally wanted to have the blank page on the back so I could write notes and be like, no, insert this here and like write it out there. And then I have essentially a modified working draft in my little 3-ring binder. And Scrivener, I did use Scrivener as well, where it became a digital little binder of sorts, carrying around all the pages. But for the most part, it was just that AlphaSmart Neo where you type on it, I spit it out from there onto Scrivener, and I would just print everything out. And I feel like I kind of cracked how I work to an extent.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just I realize now it's like I went through too many rounds of revision on my own, and like getting an editor involved earlier on is a better thing than keeping that internal revision going. And, working with you, working with my friend Todd Foley, working with editors can be a little scary, but it makes it so much better versus trying to do everything on your own.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about criticism and critiquing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this is a very sharp tool in someone's arsenal that they need to hone, that they need to know how to use, and not use as in how to critique and criticize others' work, but how to accept that. We've talked about how it can be embarrassing to give someone your novel for the first time, be like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? But it's a different level when you're hiring someone to edit your book to help you with not just typos and grammatical, fixes, but hey, help me with plot and timeline and character development. Give me critique on that. Now, for me, I use my beta readers for this more than an editor. I ask my beta readers what scenes didn't make sense. How did it flow? What characters? And they're very rough on me. I have 2 people in particular that sometimes I'm like, I want to give it to you, but I'm scared I have to do so many rewrites after I do, and I'm not ready for it. How do you take that criticism and those kind of critiques in a way that doesn't make you hate your own book or characters?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to consider the source. You have to realize that you're not writing for everybody. That's a big point. I mean, like a lot of my favorites, my wife won't even. She's like, no, like even Jaws. She's like, no, that's scary. I don't have to go in the water if I watch that. And I'm like, I'm like, how do you not love this? How do you not love The Godfather or even true romance? We all have certain triggers that we're like, this ain't my thing. That ain't my thing. And I think that's an important part of context. Like, I know my stuff, like this book is not for everyone. If I wanted to write a vanilla kind of bland coming of age book, I don't know if I could do it. Honestly, I don't think I could. I would just probably, because it wouldn't have enough conflict in there for me. I think just knowing that, hey, give us some context, what other movies, what other books does this person like? It might be just, this isn't something they like. And one of my beta readers said that. He's like, thank you so much for asking me to read this. He's like, the writings, he's like, I can't offer you feedback on this. This isn't the kind of book I enjoy. I don't read this very much. And I was like, no worries. Thank you so much for your honesty.
That was very brave of him to say it. Yeah.
It was, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, seriously, just thank you for your honesty. I was like, it's refreshing. I mean, it's cool. No worries. I appreciate it, man. And he's helped me with some nonfiction stuff. I've helped him with some nonfiction stuff. I know this is kind of a turn, for some folks. And that's cool though, because I think it'd get boring really quick if we were, only writing nonfiction.
Yeah. I know I would be bored. Well, and I love that example because I am not a reader of this genre. I would never go to the bookshelf and pick up your book because of the genre it is. It's not my first choice. But working with you and reading it, I was like, you know what? I judge this a little too quickly. I do like it. And I know that I worked with you and read it because not only it wasn't the genre I wanted, but I'm like, I still love characters and I love story and I love, a redemptive storyline. And so I wanted to read it for that reason. I wanted to see how you saw people, how you saw these conflicts resolving, or if they did resolve. I wanted more than just, oh, here's the genre. Will you like it? And I learned so much because I know I gave you some feedback and you're like, that's not really what they do in this genre. That's not how you're like, that's a fantasy description kind of thing you're telling me to do. This is not that kind of genre. And I was like, oh, but it could be better. And you're like, nope, that's for your genre. You push back in really good ways to help me learn, even though I was giving you criticisms to change your own work. Yeah.
And where do we get this from? Like, where does this come from? From the other stories. From that, that's where we pick up on these things. And it's just, I think we're always soaking up more stories. I think, and just because you don't like something like today, it doesn't mean you won't like, ooh, yeah, I'll check that out. Even tomorrow, you never know. And I've turned my opinions massively on some of these, even the Tarantino stuff. Like I first saw Pulp Fiction, I was like, eh. And now I'm like, oh wow, yeah, there's some parts that are so awesome. I love this. And I think we can always find, new stories and even rediscover new stories too. It's funny how where we're at like today influences so much of how we see things. Yeah. You become a father, you become a, you get married or something. It's like it just shifts. You're like, oh, okay. So I kind of view it more as we're always changing and evolving with our tastes versus, hey, I don't read X, I don't read Y. Because I mean, personally, like I didn't read that many female authors before. And it wasn't like, I will not read female. That wasn't my agenda remotely. I was like, I just haven't seen that many books in the genres that really interest me or storylines that jumped at me. And I read Miles from Nowhere. I think I said, hey, Caitlin, I want to send you this book because I was like, this book was really, really influential for me. And now I'm like, hey, I want to write more female characters. I want to write, completely different areas because there's always like, it's almost like it's an icebreaker. Yeah. Where you switch and you shift with your tastes and.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like you have taught me so much about your genre that now I wouldn't shy away from looking and browsing those shelves at the bookstore. I wouldn't be like, oh, I'd never read that. I'm like, okay, I understand now why this genre is written a little differently. And now I'd be more open because those stories have just as much character development, just as much excitement and adventure. And yeah, I feel like it opened my eyes a little bit to be more flexible with the different genres out there. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've kind of been the same in other genres, and we can learn so much from each other if we just open our eyes and open our minds a little bit more that way.
Yeah.
And you don't want to make big assumptions, be like, because a good story is a good story as long as there's that, compelling characters, conflict. I do think a ticking clock has to be in the mix. Like there has to be some urgency in the mix too. I think those are the big parts. And obviously, what you set up has to have some form of payoff. I feel like that's like, those are the 4 like keys to story. And that's often what I see missing a lot of times with big blockbuster movies or even some books where you're just like, maybe it's in there, but it's further in there. And it might be, it might be worth exploring and, might be totally worth the effort there. But I don't typically have that approach. I'm kind of, hey, let's dive in fast and jump into it. Which is, it's probably a TV movie influence, frankly. That's probably it there.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Because, and you write for the visuals, and the best way to visualize it is what are the TVs and movies we've seen. Yeah. Well, we've got about 10 minutes ish left. I want to talk about your book a little bit more specifically because we've referenced it here and there. You've told us about some characters, but give us a summary of Bite the Bullet. What is Bite the Bullet? What is it about? Tell us all.
Okay. Bite the Bullet is the story of a man named Ryan Malone on the Chicago police. And he is an idealist. He wants to make a difference, but it seems like no matter what he does, he cannot make a difference, and he's not getting any traction. The streets are not any safer. There's all these problems with dirty politicians, and crime is on the rise and all of this. And Ryan Malone is basically thrown right in the middle of it. And it's like, what's going to give here? What's going to happen when you are basically in the toughest place ever and you're wanting things to change? Well, I think Ryan Malone, essentially things get worse and worse and worse, and everything that pretty much can go wrong, does go wrong. Well, what's going to happen? Where's the turning point? And Ryan does find that. And it's really this adventure where you have to lose a lot and go through a lot to get through. And it's really the first novel in a series. I'm thinking there will be probably 3-4 other books, not just with him, but like in this world. And he's going face to face with some of the biggest gangs in Chicago and some cartels as well from Mexico. And it's an adventure that I can't believe I crammed it all into 200 and some pages. That's my honest thought. I don't know how that happened, but it's been a blast. And I feel like my favorite thing is it just has so much action in there. Like I could almost see this being like a movie or a show or something like that. And I'm so close to launching it. It's like, oh my gosh, how did this finally get to come into the world? Okay. All right. I'm ready.
All right. So when does it launch? Where can people buy it? Can they pre-order? Tell us those details.
July 13th, they can buy it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere books are sold online. And it will be available in paperback as well. And I can't wait to officially launch this to the world. I'll put a link in this in the description for the video. You can pre-order it on Amazon now if you want. My best advice would be just type in Bite the Bullet and then Jim Woods. And then it pops right up there. Got the bullet cover. Yeah. I like, and this is still a proof. I have the official one. It's printing right now as we speak. So, yeah.
Awesome. And what are other ways that people can support you as an author? Because you do have other books out there.
Yeah.
You do other things
I
besides just
do. Thank you for mentioning that.
yeah.
I have a couple others on Amazon as well. One is Ready, Aim, Fire. That is not fiction. I really, I don't want to tell you how bad I'm tempted to just like to take that and be like, I'm switching it up on you. But it's about goals. It's a nonfiction book that is, family friendly and everyone can enjoy that. And also Focus Booster is more of a productivity book that is available on Amazon as well. And you can always support me at jimwoodswrites.com, just my name and the word writes. And I love helping other writers. I love working with other writers and businesses, and any way that I can help others tell good stories. That's my favorite thing to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. So bite the bullet, July 13th, which is next week, I think.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, next Tuesday. Available where all books are sold online.
Yep. Thank you so
Awesome.
much. Appreciate it.
Well, Jim, thank you for letting me kind of switch gears on you and interview you a little bit. And I know you like to keep things conversational, but I just always have so many questions. I want to know how your mind works, how you switch gears from nonfiction to fiction. So I appreciate the opportunity and the chance to just sit and make you the guest today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right.